Hey guys, Pat here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And the other day on Facebook Marketplace, I found this Welder generator for sale. The guy wanted like $1,500 to start with, and I was watching it, didn't contact the guy, thinking, well, that looks like it'd be pretty handy to have. And the next day I looked at it, they reduced it down to like $1,000. And then I called the guy up about it, and he says, I'll take $800 for it. I says, well, that sounds fair. He says you didn't know what was wrong with it. He said it would operate for 10 minutes as far as he knew, and then it would shut down. What he had done is he inherited this from a father-in-law, I think it was. The guy over there was having issues with it. So I took a chance. The guy said $800. If you guys have looked at these, you know that they're up into the thousands of dollars. Very expensive. So that's especially a 9,000 watt generator slash welder. This has wire feed and TIG and AC, DC, arc welding, positive and negative. I met the guy halfway. He drove an hour and a half and I drove an hour and a half. We met. All I wanted to do is see if it had fire. So I put just a little bit of fuel in the carburetor and just cranked it over, and I heard it sputter and it quit. And I said, well, that's good enough for me. And he looked at me and says, that's all you want to do? I said, yep, that's it. I said, if nothing else, it's parts for my other one. I have another one just like this one on a service truck. At any rate, I got it home. I put a little more fuel in the carburetor. I just took the air cleaner off. And then you have access to your carburetor. Then I poured just a tiny bit of fuel in here and went to go try to see if it'd start up. And again, it fired a couple of times on the cylinder and went flat. And so I thought, well, okay, what I'll do now is I'll check to see if there's fuel in it. So I come over here, loosen the cap. The fuel had kind of a lacquery type smell when gasoline gets bad. It has a peculiar smell, and I'm very familiar with that smell. So I went ahead and stuck a clean stick in there and dropped it down to the bottom of the tank, and the tank was completely dry. So that was good. That was good. I didn't have to drain any old fuel out of the tank. So first I put Snail treatment in here, and then I filled it up with 5 gallons of non-ethanol fuel. So I go to try to start it, and the only way I could get it to start is to pour a little bit of fuel back into the throat of the carburetor. That was the only way it would fire. So that told me it wasn't pumping fuel to the carburetor. So then I come to the opposite side of the machine and I remove the fuel filter. This is the outlet side, this is the inlet side. And so on the outlet side, the fuel filter was completely dry. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a stoppage in between the fuel filter and the fuel tank. So what I did is I blew back air bubbles or air back into the fuel tank, and I can hear the fuel gurgling down inside the tank itself. So that told me that there was no blockage from this point down into the fuel tank. So my next thing, I said, okay, maybe the fuel pump is bad. So I removed the air cleaner assembly, and right here is the fuel pump. I thought, well, maybe the fuel pump is bad or gummed up. So I went ahead and removed the fuel pump, and inside there's a set of valves coming in and a set of valves going out. There was one set of valves in here. They're little flat plates that open and shut as the carburetor pulses. One side was stuck closed. So I very carefully unstuck the stuck side and reinstalled the fuel pump after I cleaned it up really well. Carefully reinstalled it. But before I did that, I went ahead and ordered another carburetor kit and also another fuel pump for this, because that could be a very common occurrence in small engines, is having problems with either one of these. So just having a kit on hand I thought was was a good idea, so I went ahead and ordered those up. Played around with the old ones to see whether or not I could get these ones to work again. So anyways, I reinstalled the fuel pump, went to go try to start it, and it started right up. And mind you, hasn't been started for years. Now obviously when you go to start something like that, you want to make sure you got plenty of oil in it. You want to just lightly turn it over a couple of times just to get the oil back on the machine surfaces. You don't want it to seize up on you. So in the front of the machine, there's an on switch and a kill switch. I had this in the off position. I went ahead and pushed the start button and let it turn over a few times to get the oil back up on the machine surfaces on the crank and different things to lubricate it. It had good oil in it. The oil actually looked pretty good. Turned it over a few times, sounded really good, and then I turned it into the run position. And with the choke on, I went ahead and hit the starter, and it started right up, and it sounded really good for a moment, and then it sounded like it was getting too much fuel. Then I shut the choke off, and then went to go try to start it again, and it acted like it was getting too much fuel. So I thought to myself, well, there's something hung up or haywire or gummed up in the carburetor. There's 4 screws, 4 Phillips screws. Well, you can use a flathead or a number 2 Phillips, and remove these 4 screws right here and carefully remove the top part of the carburetor. Generally, it's a good idea to stick something inside of the carburetor itself so you don't drop stuff in there. There's some throttle linkage right here that needs to come off. And so you carefully raise this up, and it'll pop right off of the this little L right here that hooks right into this linkage hole right here. I carefully looked everything over and cleaned everything up. What I found is there's a control float in here, and it just slips right inside that little slot there. And what that does is it regulates the fuel coming in through the pump. This pump is just pumping all the time, and so there's a little valve in here. That little valve right there wasn't where it was supposed to be. Well, that little valve, it hangs right there and it floats around on that little clip. And it's not really a clip, it's just a kind of a hanger. At any rate, this little valve was in the bottom of the reservoir in here. So I fished it out, and then I cleaned out all of the inside of the carburetor inside a, I don't know, you call that a sediment bowl or what do you call that? But anyway, this is where all the fuel lays in here. Well, there's old fuel in there. I went ahead and cleaned that out. I cleaned this little valve up really well too. And then I carefully tilted it back so it wouldn't fall out of the little hanger. And then I carefully placed it back into, well, where it's supposed to go. And that's how that works. These have holes in it, and this little post here has holes in it. I made sure that these were clear. It wasn't plugged up, like with old fuel or something. The gasket looked really good on this, the top part. I just went ahead and left the gasket on this. There's a hole right here, and a little slot right here, a little half moon slot right there. And that's where those 2 posts go, pickup lines, or I'm sure that guys that work on carburetors all the time are going to know what those are. But they were clear, and just carefully put that back on. These 4 machine screws. This is a little bit tricky getting these breather hoses back on. Takes a little finesse and patience. Suppose a guy could put a little oil on these or something like that, and it would pop through a lot easier than fighting like I'm doing here. Just a little bit of 90 weight or something. That took a little persuasion, but there we are. But for the sake of the video, I'll go ahead and put the rest of the fasteners in here later. But there's 2 bolts that go in here to hold this pan down. And then there are 3 actual bolts that go in here and attach to the carburetor itself. Okay, so after cleaning that up, I went ahead and put this in the on position. Choked it out maybe halfway, and then went ahead and gave it a start. The auto idle works great. After a certain period of time, if it doesn't sense any load, it'll automatically idle down a few hundred RPM. I thought, great, it's running. It sounds really good. And so I went to go ahead and plug in, try the outlets to see if they worked. So with the machine running, I plugged in this drill, hit the throttle, auto idle, kicked off, and it started ramping up in RPM, and the drill actually sputtered. Just, you know, it ran just for a fraction of a second and then started really going slow. So I thought, well, that's not right. It should just be running like there's no tomorrow. So there was something haywire with the electronics on this. So I thought, well, I'll check the voltage, and the voltage was wrong. It was way under voltage. I checked the voltage on the 220 or 230. It wasn't right. So I thought to myself, well, I'd have to take all the panels off of this and take a look on the inside. So right now I just have the panels sitting on here just so I can take them off and show you. So the top has to come off first. There are 6 5/16 screws on this top portion of the shrouding that come off. They're just 5/16 screws like this. You can use a flathead screwdriver, or you can use a 5/16 drive, or whatever you want to do to get them off of there. Then you got to remove the cap, the fuel cap. Again, I removed all the screws on the top. And as you can see, I got all the screws removed on the side panel too. So when you guys go to take this apart, this is what you'll have. This panel right here is dependent on these screws here to hold it in place. And likewise with this shroud right here, looks like a heat shroud of some kind. So they go right in these notches. The front panel goes into this notch. And so then you have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those 5/16 screws holding this panel onto the side of these connection points. So when you drop this panel down, there are 2 little hooks or catches in there that are shaped like that. Once you get the panel about parallel to the ground, you can lift that straight up out of there. Hopefully that'll help you guys. You know, you don't fight and try to bend these things all to pieces trying to get them out. That's the secret to getting this off of here and not bending those out, is just to, again, just drop it straight down to where it's parallel to the floor and then just lift it out. I look in here and I find a mouse nest or something like that down in this corner right here, and it was just full of nest material. Looked like insulation and grass and all kinds of different things. And so I'm thinking, okay, I probably got a mouse that's probably got in here and started nibbling on some wire. I could have a chafed wire that's been chafing against one of these panels or on a corner or something. So I carefully looked in through here, cleaned the mouse nest out of there. He had a pretty good home going on. No mouse, by the way. Looked the connections over really well, and I didn't see any indications that a mouse or a rat has been nibbling on any of the wires, because that could very well be an issue. If you see a mouse nest or something's been sitting for a long period of time, you definitely want to watch out for bite marks through your insulation. Now right here you can see a little bit of abrasion on the shielding, or on the casing, wire casing, where it's been rubbing up against the side of the panel. And so I'm going to have to address that I'll take and push that wire back a little bit to where it's free suspended in the air, and take some zip ties and zip tie that to where it doesn't touch that panel, that side panel. I'll look the rest of these wires over really good and make sure that the zip ties are all in place. None of them are broken or wore out or falling off of here. A little more sanitizing to go on. I did take a air hose and finished blowing out what I could in here. It has a lot of dust and dirt. I took some long needle nose and some surgical pliers and removed a lot more than this out of there. I just saved a little piece of it to show you what they had going on, and cleaned it all out, blew it out with air, got all the dust out that I could, inspected everything, and everything looked good to me. I went to the front of the machine and removed this 3/8 inch bolt. It looks just like the bolts that were holding on the side and top panels, but except for they're a little bit bigger. And there's a little shroud in here, a little heat shroud or a little protection shroud. There's a clip up here and a clip down here. You gotta just kind of work it off of the this metal, flat metal piece in here. These clips just kind of hold on to that, looks like 3/8 inch steel in there, top and bottom. There's these contacts in here. So on the other side, I removed the brushes. There's a set of brushes over there in a little holder. There's another one of these shrouds over here on this side. But in order to take this one off, you need to disconnect your fuel. So I disconnected the bottom line and then bent the fuel filter up and above around here to get it out of the way. And so you still have these wires in here, but you can work around the wires and get this shield off of here. Well, if you can see, right back in here is that assembly that holds the brushes in place, and then there's two wires coming off of that. There's a blue wire and a pink or red wire. So I took the brushes out and looked at those and cleaned them up a little bit with emery cloth, and they looked good. They had continuity on the two spade connectors. I don't want to take that thing out of there. It's kind of a little bit of a hassle, but I wanted to get in here to where at least you guys can see that assembly, that holder that holds the brushes, and the brushes have a spring in there, and the brushes press against those contacts that rotate, and that's where your power comes from. I took some contact cleaner. You get this at any hardware store. It helps to remove oxidation, because that copper will oxidize and get dirty and start making bad contact with your brushes, and your brushes can get dirty as well. I took some wore out 320 grit sandpaper that's been heavily used and very lightly cleaned up these contacts with this contact cleaner and the emery cloth. After cleaning those contacts, I came back over and plugged my drill back in, started the machine up. I waited until it auto idled, and then I pulled the trigger on the drill and it came to life. It worked excellent, and I couldn't be more happy. It didn't take a whole lot to get this going other than a lot of time, because I've never done this before. I've never fooled with it. I was just methodically trying to think through things, and that's what we came up with, is just kind of looking things over really good. It needs fuel and it needs fire. So all those things I methodically looked at. The engine was easy to figure out. It just took a little bit of time just to kind of think things through. The electrical part of this thing, I was thinking, oh my goodness, I think I got took. A lot of times it's just really simple things. I was thinking, well, maybe the generator itself had a internally busted wire or something burn up inside there, but lucky for me, it was just cleaning those contacts, and that made all the difference in the world. So if you guys have something like this, I'm sure that Miller's probably runs on the same idea, but If you've got any of these old Lincoln welders, they're probably all very similar in the way that they generate power. And so you have those and mechanical wear points that can get dirty, and then you can stop getting good clean voltages off of these things. The other thing that I wanted to run by you guys is I checked continuity on both of these welding leads, and they were good. But when I went to go to try to weld, I just got an old chunk of metal just to see if I could get power to this. I got to figure out what's going on here and repair it. But I had continuity. And what I mean by checking the continuity is that I just took and laid out both of the ends, and I took my multimeter and put it on ohms, and then I touched one side here and then one side on the other end and made sure that I was making contact clear all through the wire. Whenever you get something like this, it's a good idea to check that instead of running around in circles trying to figure out if there's something wrong with the machine. It could just be the leads themselves. All the connections worked. So then I got a piece of metal and grounded it, and then went to try to weld, and I had nothing. It didn't weld for me. So then what I did is I went back behind here and cleaned the contacts with these switches. So all I did when I went to clean these contacts, as you can see, there's mechanical connections in here, and I just took the contact cleaner, and as I was turning this, I just sprayed it on there as it was making contact and rubbing against those different legs in there. I just kept working that back and forth, cleaning up those contacts. Just made sure I had good contact with all those pins, and just exercised that back and forth. And then there's a knob on the other side that we did the same thing to. We just, every place where there's a contact point or a change, that tab right there makes contact with each one of these points individually. So I went through and I cleaned it all up, exercised it. And then I went ahead and fired the machine back up. Just doing those simple steps of just cleaning. So I'll go ahead and change the oil and change the oil filter. We'll get a new air cleaner. We'll get a new sponge. You're supposed to soak that with oil, motor oil, to trap any dust. So this one here is looking pretty haggard, so I'm going to go ahead and change that out, get a new one coming. I'll probably get a couple new plugs just to keep on hand. I always like to keep an extra set of filters around, so I always have a backup. So when I change out a filter or do a service on it, then I have that stuff on hand, and I can go ahead and order up another set to have as a backup at my leisure. And I think for 800 bucks, I don't think I did bad. If you can't figure this stuff out, something like this could be a nightmare. But a lot of times it's something real simple, guys, and you can come across something like this. Maybe you have a buddy that knows something about it. They can go with you to go check it out. Anyway, hope this helped you guys out. Thanks for stopping by and watching. Take care, and God bless.